All right. Good evening and happy Sunday. It's early Monday morning here where I'm located at, but I wanted to go ahead and record our podcast for this week. And so there's a lot to talk about. As you all know, the jobs report for February 2024 came out just this last Friday, March the 8th, as it usually does the first or second Friday of the month. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it. I know it's kind of one of those better late than nevers, but it's important that we do talk about it because there were a lot of really interesting numbers within it. The top line really of everything that this jobs report showed was that we added 275,000 jobs this past month. And that's pretty good, usually, quarter million. But there's a lot of issues that came out of this particular jobs report. And I wanted to just give some of the top five takeaways, because as much as the top line looks great, the rest of it does not look as beautiful as it generally is. So, what are some of the takeaways? Number one, wage growth is slowing, and these are in no particular order. I really just wanted to put these out there. Number one, wage growth is slowing. It's only up 0.1% over the last month, up about 4.5% over the last year. This deceleration, as you learn, is important because over the next over the next little bit, the slowing of wage growth means that inflation, in terms of labor inflation, is slowing down. And number two, that being able to see this growth means that uh, companies don't have to spend nearly as much money, which means that employees have less money to spend, which in turn means that they're not going to go out and spend their money on a ton of things. Strange to say, but that happens to be the case as the Fed is trying to lower inflation. Number two, unemployment climbed to 3.9%. So it was 3.7% the previous month, but we have to know that the Fed wants this to happen. More unemployed people means that demand drops, which leads to price drops in the long run, which means that inflation goes down. It's going to be a common theme as we talk about that here. And so it may need to go up into the fours before the Fed actually does something by mid-year, because that means enough people have been put out of work that it has an impact on the market. Number three is that, and this is not so much a jobs report takeaway as much as it's something broader, is that the layoffs are the worst since 2009, uh, according to the firm Challenger Grain Christmas, which helps companies deal with their employees who have been laid off. And so 84,638 people were let go in February, the worst in 15 years. And the bright spot, I suppose, is that the February cuts were less than January, February of 2023. So it shows that while layoffs are ebbing, they're still quite high. And tech has led these layoffs, but other areas are increasing their layoff footprint, such as industrial manufacturing, energy companies, education, and even financial services. And so if you look specifically at the jobs report, you'll notice that business services, information, common areas that have been for tech had very little to no gain. And so that's a really, really important thing. And this is also what Jerome Powell, Fed chair, wants because the lower these interest rates are, or the rather the higher unemployment is, like we keep saying, the less people are spending money and saving it and not spending it at all, unless it's on the absolute necessities. And the more they are out here lowering basically inflation, as we've been saying for pretty much the majority of this podcast. You'll hear this theme over and over again. And so that's something that needs to be seen. Unfortunately, as founder of Albert's List, I hate this because people lose their jobs along the way, and in some sense, it just serves as collateral damage. The fourth takeaway from this jobs report is that it was interesting to see where jobs grew the most. They benefited from areas of increased government spending. And so this was, as you might guess, government, education, and healthcare. Three areas that are very, very influenced by the evolution of our economy and basically where this presidential administration places its bets. Government added 52,000. Education was about half of that. Healthcare added another 67,000, which has been growing for quite some time now. And so this continued growth in regulated areas, while the aforementioned information, business services, and financial services remains flat, means that government spending is perhaps the sole reason why, unlike the rest of the world, the United States is not in recession yet. Now, it stands to be told, will this short-term infusion of cash and jobs and thereby hopeful spending lead to more taxation? Probably, because the government will claw some of that money back. But it also means that it creates jobs along the way that ensure that a large segment of the population continues to work wherever they may be located. And so, is this good news? I guess you can say it's good news because, on one hand, you have a lot of people who are working still. On the other hand, it's all propped up artificially through government policy, which, is a lot of ways like what we saw during the Obama era around the Great Recession, right? If you recall the term shovel-ready jobs, that was the term given to open roles that were created by way of government spending in the construction arena, in the infrastructure arena, in jobs that were created to stimulate the economy and send the economy forward and give it a lurch despite everything that had happened with the banks and the Great Recession and so forth. So we'll see where this goes. And then takeaway number five, and this is probably the most important takeaway out of everything. There's been a chart going around that shows that the economy is slowing down due to the numerous amounts of downward revisions that we've seen over the past few months, including a gigantic 130,000 or so revision that we saw in January. And this is important because it shows that whatever the government's been reporting is not as rosy as we expect it to be. Now, of course, if you're going from 260 to 130 or 150 to 110 or 200 to 95, it still means that jobs are being created. It just means that jobs aren't being created as fast. And of course, the conspiracy theorists may be out in full force saying that uh, the government is denying us the truth. And maybe there might be something to that. Of course, there's always numbers that change after the fact because the government decides to take a different direction, or rather, hiring entities decide to take a different direction. So it stands to see like where that may be going here in the future. And so that's kind of one of those things to watch until maybe it's too much that there's just not enough left over. So, what do we make of all of this data? I think it's important to ask this question because this is a question that a lot of folks who've been unemployed long term, a lot of economists who wonder where the direction of the economy may be going, and so forth is. And it means, I think, a couple of things. I think number one, slower wage growth means less worker inflation, as I mentioned, which means that the cost of items could eventually come down. Hard to say, given that a lot of companies are continuing to see great profits even as they raise prices, especially grocers and so forth who sell very inelastic goods in the form of food that we all need every single day. So this is kind of a we'll see, it may depend sort of role when we get to that point. I would also say that unemployment climbing means that there are more participants, but there's also more who are filing. Tech companies offer these cushy severances that we've heard about over the last couple of years, where they literally give their employees a ton of money to go away and 6 months to find a new job either internally or just sit there until something comes about it. And I would say that the increased unemployment rate would be due to the fact that you have more people filing for unemployment in non-tech roles where the money is not as cushy. So we had mentioned industrial manufacturing, energy, finance, where maybe some of these companies simply don't have the money and are just saying, we're going to let you go. We're going to give you a month, maybe 2 weeks of severance. You'll get some outplacement services, and then we'll call it a day. And that's a lot different than the 6 month runway that a company like Google or Meta will give their employees. Number three, I think what we make of this is that we may be starting to see um, the ripple effects of tech layoffs going into other industries. As companies in the technology field, which is very much leading a lot of things, look to dial back on multiple projects and focus on their priorities, it invariably impacts organizations around because you'll just note that maybe there's a level of dependency, or even that you just see overall consumer spending be reduced. So, for example, if you are a big tech company in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, where I'm located, and you have long depended on flush reserves and lots of spending by wealthy tech elites who come to your restaurant and spend a ton of money, you may be seeing this difference now where you have 300, 400 fewer people maybe coming regularly. And that's a hit to your bottom line as much as drinking and eating places continue to be hot. And that means you maybe lay off a worker for yourself. And that layoff of that worker means that perhaps extracurricular activities are less in demand and so forth. And you see that that impact starts to reverberate through the economy. And of course, Chairman Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve doesn't want that to happen. But there's going to be, again, as we say, some of that collateral damage that shakes up the market. Number four, as we mentioned during the and education and government section, when with regards to jobs being added, government spending is keeping things moving. If it were not for the government spending and creating jobs in government, healthcare, education, and very highly regulated industries, I think we would have fallen into recession, much like the British have, much like where Germany has been. And so the question I think that we need to ask ourselves, and we may have a better answer for this in the next few months, is whether we are kicking the can down the road, or whether this is a genius idea for growth, or whether it's just nothing to think about and just that the government needs these workers. It doesn't mean, though, however, that we're in a good place. We're spending now with the hopes of clawing taxation back later. We're spending now in the hopes of thinking that the government will look good in the whole process of it all. And in the long run, if the private sector, your professional business services, your information, financial sector are not creating jobs, that's going to be a lag on everybody else. So the hope is that the Federal Reserve looks at these numbers, opens their eyes and realizes that, hopefully inflation can drop faster so that they can lower rates and in turn spur investment in various different projects again, which will lead to more hiring. Number five, in terms of what we make of this, is that downward revisions mean that we aren't doing as well as we think. Kind of going back on the previous one, right? Is that if you continue to revise your numbers downwards, it may not necessarily be the information that the average job seeker or government watcher wants to see because you're at that point where, yes, you are creating an economy that continues to grow. But on the other hand, you're also seeing an economy that continues to slow and maybe slow a little bit faster than you thought before. And number six, ultimately, these numbers are a lagging indicator. When you look at the impact of this, you see that this is all stuff that happened a month ago, and we're now a month later. And so, could it be worse? Absolutely, it could be worse, and we don't know yet. Could it be better? It could also be better as well. But unfortunately, as is the case with these things that look backwards, you don't really know until you know. And unfortunately, sometimes that just means you're hit by a brick that is economic calamity. So those are just some of the thoughts for this week and this week's jobs report. I wanted to spend the bulk of the time here. Um, if you liked what you heard there, please hit like, please hit subscribe, ring the bell to get notifications. Love to have you here as we post more of our videos and webinars through the year as we support job seekers. And so I know I usually have a couple more sections here. One is what the latest layoffs are. I looked at layoffs.fyi this week and I didn't really see as much. Companies that have been laying off include, really among this big list, Meta, which let go of 50 employees last week in their Facebook Messenger unit. And so this is in terms of what we see a consistent shift as Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook and Meta, continues his year of efficiency. Earlier this year, he laid off technical program managers in Instagram. And it looks like he did the same here in Meta to streamline things and create more of those efficiency pieces as he goes along. Overall, though, last week, layoffs were pretty quiet. There weren't any more gaming companies. There weren't any more media companies that were hemorrhaging talent. So I guess that's a good thing to have a week of silence in that area. On the other hand, Salesforce came out and said that it continues to hire. As you know, they made a commitment last year to bring in 3,300 employees. And there's been a lot of talk that they're bringing in a lot of their boomerang employees back into the fold. Folks who were here prior to their cut of 8,000 roles last year. And they're bringing some of those back as they increase upon some of their AI efforts and doubling down on that. So that's where that stands. As far as the rest of this week goes, we have one webinar this week here on Albert's List that you're all invited to. It's a resume review workshop. This is one of our spring resume review events that is very important to have because we realize that a lot of folks are not writing resumes in the most effective manner, given that we are in one of the most competitive job markets out there, especially for white collar workers. What we continue to see is a lack of impact driven resume writing that really needs to change in order for folks to be more effective with what they say. So join us 6 p.m. this Thursday, March the 14th, Pi Day for that, and we will see you there. So without further ado, I wanted to thank you for listening if you've listened to this far. This is Upwardly Mobile episode number 9. Next week will be number 10, and we will see you again soon. Thanks so much for listening. Have a wonderful week and best of luck in your job search.